Welcome investors to the 40 Finance channel. Shopify stock, that's what we're talking about today. Shopify has had tremendous growth over the past 2 or 3 years, and I'll be real honest, it surprised me how well that they have performed time and time again. They have continued to build on their momentum for delivering an e-commerce platform that mostly appeals to small and medium-sized businesses, but they have a couple large partners in there as well. And they were delivering solid results even before COVID, but when things changed in the shift to e-commerce, it really was a springboard for them. And now we're seeing the momentum continue, really just turning into a much bigger snowball here. So we're going to talk about Shopify stock and try to project in the short term, where does this stock go? Is it a buy now at its current price? I'll give you the bull and bear case for Shopify and my target price for 2022. All right, let's start with the bull case for Shopify, and it's pretty simple, and that is they're unlocking the power of e-commerce for customers that, let's just say 5, 6, 7 years ago would never even try to open their own internet-based store, right? So Shopify is a platform, gives you all the tools you need to build a storefront online, process payments. Subscription costs range from $29 a month all the way up to $2,000 plus if you're a large brand. But it's an affordable sort of like $1 a day, couple dollars a day that many small businesses can afford in order to be online. And with over 1 million clients and a huge network of partners who make different apps and plugins for the store, it's a positive ecosystem that's already reached a scale that it's going to be hard for competitors to come in. Now, from a moat perspective, Shopify is always going to be one competitor away from facing stiff competition, but their biggest moat right now is probably switching costs for small, medium-sized businesses. They do not have enough staff to go learn another software, build a new website, all those things. So they would have to be pretty unhappy with their Shopify experience for some reason or the other in order to bail and jump onto the next one. Now, that's the positive side of small to medium-sized businesses. On the negative side, you also have the fact that you're dealing with small to medium-sized businesses, right? So that market is gigantic, but it also has a lot of churn. Shopify doesn't share their churn rates right now, so we don't really have an idea of how things are going. We know that they're building compounding returns, but we don't know how quickly, Bob's t-shirt store that he opens up during COVID, is that thing still around or has it been replaced by somebody else's dream? So the smallest players on Shopify's platform that make up their largest base of customers is always going to be at risk to churn over, certainly over a 3 to 5 year period. We're in definitely different times right now, coming out of the COVID lockdowns and e-commerce being so big, people being on their phones so much. I could definitely see some slowing of growth at the bottom levels for Shopify. But on the flip side, let's say they can turn 20% of their small customers into larger customers, it might balance itself out. All right, now on the more fundamental bear case for Shopify, you have a stock that's trading at a fairly high valuation, which we'll get into in a little bit. Now that fairly high valuation, though, can correct itself if they continue to churn out revenue and earnings per share at the pace that they're currently on. What comes into play, though, that we're seeing in the market here in August of 2021 is that even companies that are still growing, but are not growing at the rapid pace that they were last year, they get dinged in their stock price. So you definitely would have to say one of the short-term risks for Shopify is its valuation, because if it has an earnings report that doesn't please Wall Street, even a positive earnings report that just doesn't please Wall Street, then you're going to get a ding and you're going to see some of that froth come off of the stock price. And along those lines, I would say the next sort of bear case is, does the small to medium-sized business market continue to grow at its current pace, right? We saw a lot of innovation. We saw a lot of hustle into e-commerce last year. We know that the market's a little tense with e-commerce, not because it's going away, but we had so many people shopping online last year. There's a thought process that those are going to turn, that kind of consumer money is going to turn into other markets like restaurants, bars, experiences, things like that. So there could be a chance where Shopify's penetration is potentially expanding, but the shift in consumer spending takes down their gross merchandise volume just because the money's being distributed a little differently. All right, so those are the bull and bear cases. Let's take a look at where the stock sits today. Let's take a look at the 1-year technical chart. Last year at this time, you were about 764. Today, you're up to 1491. And you can see that you've had some ebbs and flows here. Prior to today, it peaked in February, right before the sort of meltdown in the market. Went below the 50-day moving average for quite some time. Here you see on 520 or so, it's popped up above the 50-day again. And right now we've had a peak recently in the 1650 range. We're seeing a small melt out in the market right now across tech and in particular small cap stocks, but Shopify is not a small cap stock. So at 1491, you're right at the 50-day moving average. You have your RSI right now at 48. And if we go back to some of the peaks, let's see what February was. You had an RSI top of 76. So on the bright side, if you're considering Shopify, I would say it's not extremely hot at an RSI of 48. The question, of course, is do you think it's going to drop below the 50-day in the short term and maybe end up in this world where it's bouncing off 200? Or do you think that it's bouncing up from here and setting a new high? All right, as we normally do here, let's take a look at the valuations from a historical perspective. Try to get a feel for where is Shopify trading today, valuation-wise, compared to the past. And if we skip ahead to forward PE, because we want to make a forward price projection, Shopify is headed in the right direction, I would say, certainly from 2019. That's a high PE, about 500 in 2019. You got it down to 300 in the end of 2020, and we're inching towards 200. Now, in my opinion, I would say you need to continue to make progress and lower this forward PE. Shopify has all the right metrics to do that. They have growing revenue, growing EPS, but we need to stay on that trajectory to get this number down. You compare it with something like price to sales. Gee whiz, if you go back to 2018 or 2017, you had 16 times sales. The market's in a different place now. There's not a lot of other alternative investments available. But at the end of 2019, you did 31 times sales. And holy cow, last year was 56 times sales. So you're falling a little bit here, but by any stretch of the imagination, 48x is certainly high. On the bright side for Shopify, this is a stock that also is profitable, and they have an EPS. In fact, they actually report with GAAP EPS numbers, which blows my mind nowadays because you don't see that very often. So they do have some foundational elements besides price to sales to kind of support where things are today. All right, quick scan of some of the financials. Revenue trailing 12 months, almost $4 billion. Cash on hand, $7.76 billion. Very, very impressive. Total debt of $1 billion, so obviously no concerns with this much money in the bank. All right, let's peek over at short percentages. As of July 30th, short percentage of float. Be honest, I'm surprised here. 2.44%. For a stock that appears overvalued, certainly from a fundamental perspective compared to its peers, 2.44%, that's not too bad. So the shorts are not interested in Shopify right now. All right, now let's take a look and see what are analysts projecting not only for this year, but next year for Shopify, so we can try to make a target for 2022 from a price perspective using historical valuation trends and analyst projections. We've got December 2021, end of this fiscal year. Projection right now are the estimate 660 on the EPS side, 65% growth on the EPS, which is phenomenal. Forward PE of 224 here. So getting a little closer to that 200 number that I think is really what we should be starting to see with Shopify. We should see the forward PE at least slowly come down, and it looks like they're headed that way. Now, what's interesting here, at least on the consensus, 2022 EPS consensus is less than 2021. I'm going to assume that that's a mistake somewhere in the calculations, so you can get some of these low estimates and really drag down the average. Now, we do have 30 analysts involved, so the average should be strong, but I'm going to go ahead and assume that they continue building like they have in most recent years, because you see in 2023, they pick the pace right up. It just appears that this number, at least in my opinion, doesn't fit in with the rest of the scale that they're building. Now, one thing that an analyst would know that I wouldn't, just from a quick look, is if there's some sort of infrastructure spending or a new initiative that they're going to dump a lot of money into. If that were to happen, then it would hit the EPS. It would be a positive from the standpoint of long-term growth, but it would give you a setback on EPS for a single year. But I haven't read anything that insinuates a huge project, so I'm just going to make my own calculation. As far as price to sales, we saw trailing 12 months was in the 48 range. I mentioned that's a little high in my opinion. Frankly, it's a lot high in my opinion, but let's see how things trend out if revenue keeps growing. December 2021, so this would come in approximately January of 2022 when they would report. If they hit the target of 4.63 billion, 58% growth year over year, forward price to sales, that would drop it to 39 from today's price. You get to 22, 6.22 billion, 34% growth, and that's just on the consensus average. Then you get a forward price to sales under 30. Now, nobody's going to say that 30 price to sales in some sort of stock market analysis book, nobody's going to say 30 is awesome, but you're heading into the right direction. And if they outperform like they have in the past, you could definitely make the argument that buying now and holding long, you're going to come out ahead eventually. All right, now let's take a look at TipRanks, see what the best performing Wall Street analysts think about Shopify. Typically, they make their projections at least 12 months in advance. So the numbers we're looking at here in a second are going to show you the projection going ahead for around August of next year. And we scroll down here to see what each individual says. We always check for freshness, and we've had several updates. We'll stick with the gang here that's reported about 21 days ago. And you go down the line, you do have a couple holds. Holds aren't bad. They just say that if you've already bought the stock, continue to hang on to it. Perhaps, though, don't buy now to enter a new position. Got 1, 2, 3, 4, roughly 5 holds in the past 21, 22 days. On the buy side, our targets go from, let's see here, roughly $1,800, $1,700 to about $2,000. Now I'm going to get into my price target, which I usually base around fiscal years. So when I talk about my price target, I'm talking about the target or the projection for the end of January 2022, 4 or 5 months from now. That's when Shopify will report their full 2021 earnings, and they will also likely offer guidance for 2022. So I'm targeting a shorter time period, and the reason for that is to give you some idea of how much upside is potentially available, if my projections are right, how much upside is available today if you buy at this price. So here we go. Today is August 18th. Current price, $14.85 when I type this up. And Shopify is actually up almost 1% today, so they're already in the 490s. The 2021 EPS projection from analysts, the consensus is 660. That gives you forward PE of 225. 2021 revenue projection, 4.5 billion. That's the end of this fiscal year. Forward price to sales of 39. All right, so now let's take a look at my projections. This is for January 2022 when their earnings come out. It might be late January, early February. Really hard to tell at this point. 2022, my EPS projection is $8.25. That is substantially higher from where analysts sit right now. For whatever reason, they have the 2022 consensus at less than the 2021 consensus. I don't see that in anything I've read about Shopify, so I'm going to continue to keep them on the trajectory that they're currently on. That's going to land about $8.25. Factor in a forward price to earnings of 200, right? So chopping off a little bit of that multiple that we're at today, which is 225, I'm bringing it down to 200. And then you get a price of $16.50. Now, if you want to flip that a little bit and look at price to sales, that would put a revenue projection at $6.7 billion, 59 or so dollars a share, revenue per share. And I'm going to say that forward price to sales, man, that has to keep coming down. It's just so high right now. I'm marking it at 28, and it kind of fits the model as far as the EPS projection. And that still lands at a price of $16.50. So my price is a little less than what we saw on TipRanks, but don't forget that I'm going on a much shorter timeline than those analysts are going like a full year away from now, so they have a little bit more flexibility. All right, so if Shopify hits $16.50 in January, February of next year, then in that case, it's about a plus 10% from where we sit here today. So that's a solid investment. Certainly no reason to sell if you already hold shares. I do not own Shopify, so if it were me, I would probably look for some market weakness to bring some of those multiples down in hopes that I could get the price cheaper than today's whatever, $14.95. And as far as outlook for stocks, I would still make the argument that I think Amazon has more upside in the same time period, but you have to choose what fits best in your portfolio. All right, investors, hope you enjoyed this look at Shopify stock. As always, if you can spare a like for the hard work that went into this, I really appreciate it. We'll see you on the next video.